Hello, good evening and welcome to the Hot Seat. This evening our guest is a Sri Lankan writer in English, distinguished for his political analysis as well as creative and critical work. A member of the Liberal Party, and we're delighted to have with us tonight Professor Rajiva Vijayasinghe. Hello and welcome, Professor, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. How fares good governance in this country today?
I think there's very little attention being paid to it. I'm afraid that although I think the election which we won was brought a necessary change, I'm afraid we seem to have declined considerably in the ideals that we put forward. And the various reforms that were pledged by the President have been almost completely ignored. I have to say I'm deeply upset that someone whom I like very much, Karu Jayasuriya, is doing nothing as Minister for Good Governance.
We don't seem to hear of him anymore.
Not at all. I think the man is very depressed, and I'm not surprised. As the government was elected, I sent him some notes about the work I had been doing in this field, including a very interesting UN project on UNDP on improving service delivery in the provinces, improving the coordination between the elected bodies, Pradesh Sabhas, and the appointed bodies, the divisional secretariats. Because as you know, I'd done a lot of work in this area in the north and east, and I found several very simple problems that could be resolved by action. And the Secretary of Public Administration sent some notes out to this effect, but then just before the election he'd stopped moving. Karu was very keen.
But to be fair though, this government is, apart from the President, the government is sort of temporary, 100 days, they said.
Not at all. The government had a 100-day program, and they were going to dissolve Parliament at the end of it.
Yeah.
Mr. Wickremesinghe got it into his head that whether or not they fulfill the program, they should dissolve Parliament.
So that's the fundamental difference of opinion between the President and the Prime Minister.
Because the President, I believe, wants to fulfill his promises.
Right.
He's a decent man.
Okay.
I mean, I have sort of urged him that the only way we can move forward is if he gets rid of this Prime Minister, replaces him not with someone from the SLFP,
but wouldn't that be going back on his agreement with them?
No, I think he did the right thing. He appointed him Prime Minister.
Yes.
But if the Prime Minister doesn't fulfill the aims for which he was appointed Prime Minister, namely the series of reforms in the 100-day program, I think it would be right to change him. Now the President told me, no, that would be, use the word sadachar, make a hari nahi. And I can see his point of view, I respect him.
Yes.
But I think when you have a situation where day by day he's embarrassing the President more and more, I think it is a moral obligation to fulfill the commitment to the people, not the commitment to Ranil Wickremesinghe. And there are, I mean, I've outlined these. Nothing done about strengthening Parliament. Nothing done about the Code of Conduct. I was a bit rude to Anurakumar Disanayak and said, why didn't you do this? And he said, I gave the draft 2 months ago. And to go back to Karu Jayasuriya, he was very keen. Then when I went and saw him, he said, I'm afraid I don't have divisional secretariats and district secretariats. Ranil had put them with fisheries.
Oh, but he's Minister in charge of public...
His public administration, but the most important part was given to someone else. Right. Because Ranil can control it. And Joseph Michael Pereira is a dear man, but he would say yes.
And this sort of thing isn't addressed in the new 19th Amendment, in the 19th Amendment?
Not at all, because one of our promises was to have a scientifically based cabinet that wasn't even looked at. If you looked at the amendment I proposed, actually said, let's fulfill our promise, 25 ministries, based on departments. But what Karu basically told me is, I'm afraid I have no influence ever since my name came up as a possible presidential candidate. I'm not really given any position. So he's been sidelined. I think he could do more. I've suggested that he move forward with reforms, and he said, well, it's difficult to change the political culture. And I said, but Karu, we were elected to change it. We have to try. We may fail.
So in this sort of ambience of uncertainty, what becomes apparent is the resolve of the President to keep his word. And
I'm very impressed by that. You know, I think, to give him credit, he had a very difficult time in the first few months. One is, I think he expected more people in the SLFP to come out because there was a lot of worry. Not, I think, with Mahinda Rajapaksa so much as with various members of the family who were hijacking the government. When they didn't come out, the president found himself at the mercy of those who had done a lot for him in the campaign, and that is correct, was the UNP. But then he also, I think, put a lot of faith in Chandrika Kumaratunga. And she, I'm afraid, is a broken reed. I told her in November, I said, you know, you are very good in adversity, but the minute you overcome the adversity, you relax. And she looked at me, she knew exactly what I meant, and then she smiled, a charming smile, and said, no. But I said, I'm not blaming you.
How important is she in this
not at
scheme
all
of
now,
things?
not at all. And the reason is she's not interested, really. I told her, I said, you know, your heart is in England. You're a grandmother. And soon after the election,
What of her son?
From all I know, and he's a great tribute to Chandra Kumaratunga, her children were extremely well brought up. And they're not interested in getting involved in politics. I think they saved both her and the nation by dissuading her from standing for president. I believe she was quite keen to, and they actually sent messages to the children. And I think the children are admirable, and I think one has to admire her for those kids. And I don't think they're interested, and she's more interested in them, so she's hardly ever here. This reconciliation is collapsing. She's not doing much. I was just told recently the hand-picked chairman has resigned. She wasn't here to meet Pablo de Grief. His excellent report has not been responded to. And I was in London last week. I didn't want to go officially, but my friends arranged some meetings. They are wondering what's happening. And look at this tragedy, if I may call it a tragedy. We had a statement from the TNA and the GTF about confidence-building measures. I didn't say anything objectionable in the statement. I do find objectionable is 6 months after this government was elected, we have to wait for the GTF to spearhead a demand for confidence-building measures, when all these should have been instituted by the government in January.
On that note, we'll take a short break and come back to the hot seat shortly. Welcome back to the hot seat with Professor Rajiva Vijay-Singha. Professor, what do you think is the single most contentious matter for this government?
Well, I think Ranil's failure to implement promises is the worst. But since not many people are paying any attention to that, I think one thing that will probably bring him down and should bring him down is the central bank bond issue.
You mean this 30-year?
The 30-year bond in which massive amounts were given to a company, which is basically owned by the family of the governor's son-in-law, and given on what seems an ad hoc decision, contrary to a directive of the Monetary Board. And what is even worse is there was an attempt to cover it up. And I think one of the biggest problems which the President has to recognize is that when this happened in February, the Prime Minister dodged and appointed a committee of inquiry claiming that lawyers whom he chose knew much better how to do something. Their report is a shambles. And indeed the UNP members keep saying, don't ignore that report, that's a nonsense. But in all fairness to the commissioners, I think they did their best to say we were not given the powers to investigate. But we know there's a major problem and someone needs to look into this.
That's right, because the terms of reference as well is flawed.
Completely flawed. There's nothing that allowed them to look into the role of the governor. But I'm afraid they seem to have cleared the governor, which is wrong. They said he had no direct involvement in the decision.
But he says, and he's on record as saying, that he accepts responsibility for not informing the primary dealers of the increased requirement from 1 billion to 10 billion.
Now, I didn't know he'd said that, but that is
he's on
one of the
record.
flaws.
He's on record.
But the really bad thing is that he pretended initially, or rather the committee was given the impression that he had no direct involvement. He's now confessed that he issued a directive to take everything by auction. That decision was his own decision, although he claims it's a collective decision. It was nothing of the sort. It meant that the people who are meant to make a recommendation had to change their recommendation. And you had this extraordinary situation where the governor who is meant to approve actually initiates the recommendation to begin with. You know, it reminds me of that line of the man who bought a second copy of the morning paper. to prove that what the first said was true. I recommend.
Yes.
Then I run upstairs and wait till my recommendation comes to me.
Yeah.
And I say yes. I mean, the very fact that he was downstairs then, which is no secret,
Yeah.
never happened before. Why?
Well, the governor's on television a few days ago, in which he says that he played no direct role in this, and all these decisions are made by the Public Debt Department, and also, interestingly, he says that it was the 10 billion, the extra 10 times more, was required to pay the bills. But surely that's not the only way of paying a bill.
It's not the only way. It's not the only way at all. There are several ways in which you can pay the bills, and what the Public Debt Department had anticipated is what should be done over the years, which is you establish a rate by auction, and that's fair, but then you go by that rate and issue what are known as direct placements, which I'm saying the governor and the Prime Minister in this vendetta against the former governor are trying to call private placements.
When they're actually direct placements.
They're direct placements, time-honoured practice.
Can we establish what on earth are direct placements?
Yeah. And we had lots of evidence in court, which I don't think is secret, but I will not obviously talk about the evidence. Let me tell you exactly what it is.
Yeah.
When you want a certain amount of money, let's say this time 13 billion,
Yeah.
but there's a problem there which I'll come to.
Yeah.
The government does not announce an auction for 13 billion because they say very rightly that then people will know we want a lot of money and they'll want high interest.
Right.
So they offer 1 or 2 or whatever.
Yeah.
This has been the practice right through as far as I can see. When that happens, they look at the bids and they accept bids up to a reasonable rate of interest.
Right.
So, for instance, if it had been 1 billion that was advertised and they took 1 billion, the rate would have been around 10 or something.
Yeah.
If they took 2, it would have gone to a bit more.
Yeah.
Under 11, I think, still. Then what they do is they tell all the primary dealers,
Yes.
look, the auction is now over, this is the result of the auction,
Yeah.
but based on that price,
Yeah. The average.
we will offer you bonds, and you can take as many as you want.
Based on the average.
Based on that average price, or lower.
So
They're entitled to actually go for a lower rate. So the country has saved the interest that would otherwise happen, because if you went for the auction at the higher rate,
the price asked for,
it goes higher and higher and higher. Now in this case, in fact, there was offers of 20 billion, 15 of which came from perpetual treasuries. And if they'd accepted the 20 billion, the amount would have been astronomical.
Right.
As it is, by accepting the 10 billion,
Yeah.
the amount went above what is called the coupon price.
Right.
But in fact, the assumption was that far from even coming near the coupon price, the rate would have been much lower. And so it was for 1 or 2.
Right.
So the Sri Lankan people are now paying a couple of percentage points more, which is a hell of a lot on 5 billion, more than they could have been paying had the time-honoured practice occurred.
So we have calculated, my researchers have calculated, that the extra, this couple of points more, over 30 years, has now crossed the $50 billion mark. The governor in this TV interview suggests that this is a rather simplistic way of looking at it. Professor, to me, if I'm paying 3% more on my loan, that's not simplistic.
It's not simplistic at all. I mean, the governor is a liar. The governor is an absolute liar. We have asked for a calculation, and let me put it very bluntly. I would accept the point that you can't be 100% certain because interest rates change. Maybe what you're paying now would be less than what would happen in 5 years' time, blah, blah. But before you make such a major decision, where you completely change the system and benefit one particular group, you should at least make a rough calculation of what the cost might be. And we have people helping us, and they have actually expressed it publicly before
Yeah.
For instance, former Deputy Governor, Mr. Vijayawardena,
Yeah.
who has never pulled his punches. He was quite critical of the central bank under the last regime as well.
Yeah.
A remarkably honest man.
Right.
And he made it clear that immediately there was a loss.
Yeah.
So I think it's very clear there was a loss.
Yeah.
The argument being used by what I would call the groupies is that auction is more transparent.
Yeah.
And that is certainly correct.
Yeah.
Except that in this case, every other dealer said, what's the point of bidding? Because we know it won't be more than 1 or 2 billion.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's transparency.
Yeah.
And certainly if you want transparency in an auction, then you have to say we're selling so much and stick to that.
Right.
You don't say we're selling X and then suddenly, against all market expectations except perpetual treasuries,
Yeah. Yeah.
you do not raise the amount.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just fraudulent. But then we come to the second question.
Yeah.
One way is to issue direct placements.
Yeah.
There are desperate allegations to suggest that
Direct placements after an auction.
after the auction,
Right.
you fix the rate, and
Yeah.
the rate would have been something like, let's say, 10.5.
Yeah.
Then you tell everyone, you can have bonds.
Right.
And, we have never had complaints from primary dealers in the past
Yes.
to say we couldn't get the bonds.
Yeah.
What they say is that, sometimes when we call, it's all over.
Right.
But we didn't call early enough.
Right.
Some of them said, we call early before they tell us.
Right.
Now, all that is fair enough.
Yeah.
But the point is we always know that there'll be more and more bonds.
Right.
So it's not that people are shut out.
Yeah.
There are after all only 16 primary dealers.
And there was 2.7 trillion that was issued in the Rajapaksa years.
Exactly. I mean, the debt has gone up, but it was explained, and I think everyone has granted this, that we now have spaced the debt in such a way that it's not piled up. That is the reason for these long-term bonds.
Yeah.
The governor was sort of pretending yesterday that he created long-term bonds.
Right.
They were created under Mr. Cabral,
Yeah.
who pointed out the need for having long-term credit, and he's the one who started the 30-year bonds.
Right.
Nothing to do with our man from Singapore.
Right.
Now, one is direct placement.
Yeah.
The second is that you get an overdraft from the Bank of Ceylon.
Quite. I was coming to that.
And very simply, since the Bank of Ceylon had already said that we have 13 billion available,
Yeah.
you knew that you could ask them for an overdraft.
Well, they gave a facility to perpetual treasuries.
They could have given that to the government.
Yeah.
And no one bothered to ask them.
Yeah.
There are lots of ways of bridging this. The argument is we needed the money on Monday.
Yeah.
He knew they needed the money 10 days previously. But what is worse, and he said this yesterday, and it's very suspicious, he brought in this business of wanting to pay things to the Road Development Authority.
Yeah.
Now, the way that the central bank knows what government needs is through an official communication from the Treasury.
Right.
Not even the Minister of Finance.
Yes.
The relevant officers or the Secretary.
Yeah.
Now you have a situation where the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Highways and Investment Promotion and Mr. Malik Samarakraman, which as you know has been reported in the press,
Yes.
turn up in the bank and say we want an enormous amount of money. And this has never happened before. And of course, coincidentally, Malik Samarakraman and Kabir Hashim happen to be the chairman and the secretary of the United National Party, which, as we know, kept blaming business for saying, you never gave us any money during the last election.
Yeah.
And they're obviously building up their war chest.
All told, a rather unsatisfactory state of affairs for the people of Sri Lanka then.
Appalling. Unfortunate, breaching the controls that the bank has, and we're left in this utter mess. And what is worse is the cover-up. And the cover-up involves attacks on Nivad Cabral, which are outrageous. There was something in the three-man committee report, claiming that placements were made by the Superintendent of Public Debt together with the Governor.
Right.
And the document is cited.
Right.
Now the claim is they bypassed the tender board. But the document not only says the tender board agreed to this, the signatures of the chairman of the tender board and the assistant governor on that document. And the three-man committee.
So this is clearly a blatant...
It's a lie.
It's a lie.
Now the three-man committee, I think, just swallowed what they were told.
Yeah.
They cited one particular deputy governor, who is, I believe, responsible for this mess.
Yeah.
And I really think that simply on the strength of that, he must either say the committee misunderstood me or he must resign. Because you do not make wild allegations against all your colleagues, which are clearly disproved by the very document you have given.
To me, it sounds almost flippant when the governor of the central bank says that I can accept responsibility for not informing the primary dealers of the increased requirement from 1 to 10 billion. But General Fonseca or Field Marshal Fonseca said that the governor of the central bank can't be making silly mistakes like this. Is Fonseca right?
Fonseca is 100% right. And I think the way the role of the governor has been sketched out by John Exter, it is astonishing that he did not resign immediately. Because you have to have confidence. And when you let down your officials by perverting their decisions, when you then try to defend it and allow a report to be published that exonerates you falsely because he now accepts said responsibility, and then when you go on the rampage against the previous governor, on a barrage of falsehoods, because the idea of so-called private placement is complete nonsense. It started in 1998. And Cope has asked, I can say this, we said, okay, tell us where there was unfairness in the direct placement. Who has complained that they were not given offers? Give us a list of the people who benefited from this. And I think very simply, you will find that, as indeed everyone says, a lot of the sales of 30-year bonds go to things like the EPF and the ETF, government boards. Now, on the one hand, I have to say I have great respect for Aaron Wickramatta, but in the last 2 days, I think the poor guy, whom I really love, and I think who should be High Finance Minister, because he has an absolute reputation for integrity. But he has also become silly and turning into a hatchet man.
No, he says that the former governor is responsible for putting spokes in the wheel in terms of raising funds. So if the former governor has so much of clout in the international markets, perhaps he should be the governor.
Well, I think certainly his record in the last years has been fantastic in a difficult time. Some of us may believe.
But can he do that? Can somebody accumulate so much of power to influence international markets?
It's all absolute nonsense. I mean, here is a government, and Iran in that respect is honest. His little hatchet man job let the cat out of the bag. Because there was the government saying, no, everyone has confidence in us and our bids are oversubscribed and so on. And everyone knows they wanted X and they got much less than X. And they were pretending there was no problem. But now Iran has come out and said there was a problem, but instead of accepting the fact that of course there is a problem when you have dishonesty, blatant dishonesty, whereas don't forget under Cabral, there were clean chits for the work of the central bank from IMF, the World Bank, etc. To claim that Cabral, who doesn't even have an office now, is sitting there making telephone calls to these important investors and stopping them, is an admission of total incompetence. But don't forget, this idea of sabotaging the country is a Ranil Wickremesinghe idea. You people have forgotten that when Nivad Cabral started issuing bonds on a large scale, Ranil Wickremesinghe threatened the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank.
By saying that he wouldn't honour those.
He would not honour the bonds.
I
mean, is that not outrageous? You are in an elected government which makes a decision. You may disagree with that decision. Then you explain why it's bad. But you do not threaten investors and tell them that you're trying to destroy confidence in Sri Lanka. Outrageous behavior. And poor Iran, I can't believe he did this off his own bat, was told to make the same sort of allegation against Nivad Cabral in a totally incredible context where this one man who is now not in power is supposed to have sabotaged all this. I mean, to assume that investors around the world are going to follow the advice of an ex-governor of the central bank.
Of tiny Sri Lanka.
Tiny Sri Lanka is complete stupidity. And it is vicious, and I'm really sorry that someone of the reputation of Iran should be being used by this bunch of crooks. Because Iran was not involved in that. Iran's the one who knows about investment. He neither knew about this meeting which his boss Kabir Hashim and Malik Samarkand had,
Yeah.
nor did he go there.
Right.
So his record is clear.
Something strikes me odd. The Prime Minister has been very meticulous in his explanation to Parliament about this bond matter, and he infamously or famously named various people of misdeeds in the stock exchange. But what struck me as being odd was that he did not mention that Mr. Malik Samaravikrama was present at this meeting, and that he was present actually as a special advisor to the Prime Minister. Do you think that Mr. Samaravikrama has any specialist knowledge of central banking?
Mr. Samaravikrama, as chairman of the party, has specialist knowledge in promoting the UNP and Ranil Wickremesinghe. Now, I can tell you this,
Yes.
that in November, when I got involved and was supportive of the election campaign in which the UNP was involved,
Yeah.
having, in a sense, burnt my fingers twice before,
Yeah.
when I realized, I had been supportive of Ranil Wickremesinghe,
Yeah.
and he had let the country down. But I told Malik and Kabir, who was then, I think both chairman and secretary,
Yeah.
I said, for God's sake, I hope you are not going to put in any crooks like Tilak Marapana.
Mm-hmm.
And Malik said to me, he said, no, don't blame Marapana, we know the chap who made the money. They wouldn't tell me the name. But when Marapana was Minister of Defence,
Yeah.
we know perfectly well that there were appalling, let's say, dishonesty in procurement.
Yeah.
And, I had always thought Marapana was responsible.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think he had relations in agencies or something. But Malik assured me it was not Marapana. We know the guy who did it. Now, why did they not stop it?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the simple answer is this myth of Ranil Wickremesinghe's honesty. I think it's perfectly true that Ranil Wickremesinghe will not touch money for himself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he is after all of the same blood as I am, and I don't think we need to make money.
Okay.
But, having said that,
Mm-hmm.
I think there is no doubt that he turns a blind eye, which is the kindest way of putting it,
Mm-hmm.
to money that might accrue to the party.
Mm-hmm.
And I am reminded of what, I think it was the editor of the Sunday Times told me 12 years ago. He said there will be 3 honest people in the UNP cabinet. And these are paper that loves the UNP.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, who? Ranil, Karu Jayasuriya and Karnasena Kodithuwakku. And I realized that poor Kodithuwakku lost because he had no money.
Right.
Karu did not put up posters.
Mm-hmm.
Ranil doesn't need to put up posters because the party puts them up from him.
Right.
But where does the party get the money? And this is where I think we have to look at what happened, the central bank bond scam,
Mm-hmm.
in the light of Ranil's desperation to precipitate an election and win that election. And they need money for this.
In a word, is Ranil Wickremesinghe the answer to being the next Prime Minister? Is he the best choice?
I think that'll be the end of this country.
On that
Don't
note-
forget, twice we have had experience of him in charge. Disaster.
Professor Vijay Singh, thank you for being on part 1 of the hot seat, and we should continue with part 2 next week.